Good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. There's a lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so hard. There's a lot of things that can tear you apart. I know the road sometimes feel lonely, but remember you're not the one and only. There's always someone there to help you, a helping hand to pull you through. There's only one thing you should do: take my hand and join the Love and Laugh crew. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then they love and life guide you.
Goeienaand! Good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and to the Loving Life family. Lovely to have you aboard tonight. We've got about 250 people watching at the start, which is really good. It's going to be a fascinating evening, I can assure you. Tonight I'm talking to Gustav Venter. We will only have his voice, not his video. Gustav is a straight shooter. He'll be talking to us about his perspectives on current events in South Africa, including a range of very controversial subjects like white survival in South Africa, coronavirus and the lockdown, self-determination for the white population, and has democracy failed? Obviously we'll be talking about a lot of other things as well. Hi sweetie, good to see you here. And please feel free to post your questions at any time. I will put them to Gustav later in the discussion. Alright, here we go. I'm going to get Gustav online now. Won't be a second.
Hello, Scott.
Hi, Gustav. Thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, absolutely.
Cool. We've got about, let me just see, I think we've got about nearly 300 people watching us at the moment. Now,
Well, that's joy.
it's a good starting point, yeah. Now, there's a whole lot of things that we're going to be talking about tonight, but before we actually get into that, what I'd like to find out is a bit of your background, where you grew up, all those sort of things, how you found things have changed post 1994. We'll just have your perspective on that sort of area of your life. Do you want to kick off with that?
Absolutely. I grew up on the East Rand. In fact, I'm a Brakpan boy, which I'm sure everybody knows. Everybody knows something about South Africa. We know that that's the real Cinderella town of South Africa.
Right.
I think the most maligned town in South Africa, but I had a great time growing up. Brakpan had a lovely library, and I spent lots of time there. And after that, went to university. Did not find it to my liking. Had to go to the army. I was a national serviceman, a conscript in the army. Did my training in Bloemfontein in the infantry, mechanized infantry, and went to the border as a rattle driver. And we did 2 operations, one which nobody knows anything about, called Lama, and the second one, Ops Askari, which is better known.
Right. Now, the Lama one, are you able to talk about that today?
Oh, sure. It wasn't anything particularly secret. It was just a very low-key operation.
Right.
And nothing much happened. It was like sightseeing. It was, in fact, quite jolly. At the time, I was driving a Buffel, and I had 2 81 mortar pipes on the back, with mortar crew, obviously, and we had a scenic tour of southern Angola. It was absolutely lovely. It's such a beautiful country.
Right. Such a shame what's happened.
It's a catastrophe. It is so tragic.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got to see that part of it as well, because the Portuguese, for all their failings, were marvelous builders, and some of those homesteads, those farms, looked like little towns, and everything must have been so lovely. But of course, when we got there, it was derelict and in ruins. Such a shame, such a terrible shame.
Now, carrying on with your growing up, so you were in the army?
Sure.
Yeah.
After the army, I started pursuing a freelance writing career. So I would say from 1988, that's been more or less all the time been my full-time job, working as a freelance writer, doing all of it. Newspapers, magazines, a lot of freelance stuff, books, translations, research, documentary stuff, and latterly also film screenplays, movie screenplays.
Right. Okay. So you're right into the creative writing side of things. Now, tonight we're going to be talking about some serious topics, but before we do, I'd love to get your perspective on that pivotal point in 1994. Talk to me about how you found South Africa pre-1994 and where you think South Africa is going now after 1994 under the ANC.
Well, before 1994, I mean, we just took it all for granted. But looking back at it, we grew up in a time of, well, it was really a marvelous time to be growing up in South Africa and to be living in South Africa. I was already in my 30s when the change came. But there was order and progress. We were building things. We were building cities and towns. And I grew up on the East Rand. I can remember when the first Boeing 747 came in. It was always a young country with such spirit.
Yes.
And we always had this. We had hope. we knew things were difficult and not everything was going swimmingly, but we always had hope that we will find solutions. We will work together and we will find solutions. After 1994, it's been a steady decline of hope, hasn't it? I mean, it's everything that we predicted would happen happened and more. I mean, we just couldn't foresee the complete devastation of the country. Now to drive through this country, I don't even want to call it South Africa anymore. I think we should get together and decide and call it Azania, because this is not South Africa. I knew South Africa. I grew up in South Africa, and this is not South Africa.
Well, I have to say to you, Gustav, that it's interesting you say that, because if you look at the cities like Pretoria and Durban, they've given them African names like Tshwane, and
Yes.
I actually think that's a good thing, because the Pretoria, I remember, was a beautiful city, beautifully maintained, and you look at Tshwane and it's a complete disgrace, and it's an African disgrace, let's face it.
It is. It's. Yeah, I spend a lot of time in Pretoria after the army at university as well, and got to know Pretoria very well. And you're so right. Pretoria was a lovely city with just the general atmosphere of Pretoria. I'm an opera lover, so I used to go to the State Theatre regularly. I stayed in a flat in Sunnyside, and I would take my bicycle and cycle to the opera.
I have to Gustav, I have to say, the Sunnyside Mall, I've said it so many times now, it's getting embarrassing, but when I went to Pretoria, I always used to have an hour having a cup of coffee at the Sunnyside Mall, at their coffee shop there. And there was only one reason I was doing it, and that's because the Afrikaans ladies are the most beautiful women in the world. And I would just sit there and watch these angels walk past, beautifully presented. It was
well,
such a delight.
Thank you for saying it, and I have to agree, as a connoisseur, I must say that the girls in Pretoria were the most beautiful in South Africa.
Absolutely.
But now you wouldn't go to Sunny Park now, the mall.
Yeah.
And certainly to travel from Sunnyside to the State Theatre on bicycle at night is it's pretty close to the same thing as committing suicide.
Right. Whereas before you could have easily done that.
Well, Pretoria is one thing, but take Hillbrow. Back in the day.
Gee.
I would go to Hillbrow the very famous Hillbrow Record Centre. And Hillbrow was a late night town, so you'd be there until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, walking the sidewalk. You leave your car anywhere and there'll be no trouble.
Yeah.
Afterwards, you'll take a walk to Fontana, the famous 24-hour cafe where you would buy roast chicken and so on. It was safe and it was orderly, and there was this feeling of hope and progress.
Yeah. Now, obviously, after 1994, things changed dramatically, and there's a huge amount of corruption and incompetence which is tied up with the whole issue here. Now, I want to get right into some of the areas that you have a very strong perception or point of view on. And let's kick off with racial segregation. Is racial segregation natural, inevitable, and beneficial? Is it better to be good neighbors than quarreling compatriots?
I think it stands to reason, and it's obvious. I am part of the organization Praag, and the main thrust of everything Praag does. Praag is a think tank. I think the premier think tank in South Africa right now. But the main question which keeps all of us busy is peace. How do we arrive at sustained peace in South Africa? And the only way, there is no other way, is through racial segregation. The problem is, if you have two dominant cultures, in a single geographic space. The one culture will inevitably suppress the other one. And the only way to have peace is to put a fence between those two dominant cultures. And you can see it shows up in all kinds of interesting statistics.
Right.
If you just take conflict, for instance, the United Nations approached this from their own angle. They say from the period 1989 to 1992, there were 82 conflicts in the world.
Wow.
And they define a conflict as some kind of armed struggle in which more than 1,000 people die. So there were 82 of these conflicts. Of these conflicts, 79 of them, 79 out of 82, or 96%, were ethnic or religious conflicts that took place within the borders of recognized states. Only 3 were cross-border conflicts. If you take 2017, for instance, there were 47 conflicts worldwide, and
Wow.
only 1 cross-border war between 2 states, and that was between Pakistan and India, having a flap about Kashmir. So, I mean, this is not, in any case, in any sense, arcane or a mystery. We all know this. If you want to have peace between 2 disparate groups, you put a fence between them.
Okay, well,
Good fences make good neighbors.
let me ask you this question. The deep state want to bring in a global government, one country basically under, this cabal of people who we don't really know who they are. How could that work based on what you've just said?
Well, I'm certainly no expert on it, but I would think that such a cabal, such a secret organization, all-powerful organization, would like to keep the world population off balance. The last thing they want to see is to have secure populations. So they would have to destabilize them and keep them in a situation where there is no stability. And the best way to do that is to remove borders.
Yeah, when I look at what South Africa used to be like, back in, I left South Africa in 1986. It was a stable country. Yes, there was a lot of violence by the ANC in the background in the townships and between in Carter and the ANC. There was a lot going on between those two political groups, but it was a country that, as you said, it was safe. You could walk around the streets. You didn't have to worry at night. It was a really good, solid country. And when I look even before that, when you had Verwoerd and you had the homeland policy, surely what happened to those homelands like the Transkei, where when that part of South Africa was literally self-governing by the Africans in that part of South Africa, the shops that were handed over to the Africans, the white-run shops. I'm thinking, for example, of Strachan and Company, which was in Transkei. Within 6 months, they went to ruin. The Africans who took them over didn't know what they were doing, and the same thing happened right across every aspect of that homeland policy within those homelands. Now, surely that was the elephant in the room when you consider that in 1994, stupidly, the country was handed over to the ANC, and to think that South Africa would go anywhere different to what had happened to the homelands previously is just crazy. What are your thoughts about that?
It is. It is. You touch on a very valid point, and we don't even often consider the homeland. And you're right. But if we look further afield to Africa, I mean, nobody would have thought that this this is at all feasible. If you look at Africa, the one failure after another, and we're not talking about slight failures or slow failures, we're talking about rapid disintegrations of states. And we had the one example after the other. In fact, as far as I can see, there was only really one exception to a degree, and that was Botswana.
Yeah.
But if you had a look at Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, and just work further north, Zambia, the Congo, Kenya, all of them,
any African country, literally.
they all turn into disaster zones.
Yeah.
But the point that I would like to make is, you know what? If it's your country, that's fine. Do as you think right. Mess it up, destroy agriculture, as Bob Mugabe did, ruin the economy, but just don't do it to my country.
Right.
And if we live in one country and we can't decide how we want to do this, then let's split up the country, and you take your part, I take my part, you do what you want there. If rack and ruin is what you desire, I wish you all the luck. If progress and stability is what I want, that's what I'm going to try and achieve in my country.
Yeah. Now, getting back to this point with the ANC, you've obviously seen that 1993 document that Ramaphosa penned for the ANC leadership. Yeah. We call it the Boiling Frog document.
Yes.
Clearly, so clearly, Ramaphosa is following that document to the letter. You know, the things that he's
Absolutely.
doing. We'll get on to other subjects like secession and having a separate state and stuff like that just now. But before we do, what I want to do is ask you: Do you think that the ANC government have a genocidal position against the whites? Do you think that this is all leading up to creating such racial division between the groups in South Africa that they are actually hoping that there's a genocide against the whites in South Africa?
Oh, well, it will certainly suit them. It will suit their purposes. I'm always slightly hesitant to try and analyze somebody's motives. But clearly, if there should be an organized or even popular movement to exterminate the whites, it will suit them very well. It'll take the pressure off them. It will certainly give them access to white possessions, and just culturally speaking, it would certainly suit the ANC if there was such a campaign against the whites.
Well, I think there is a campaign against the whites, and I think what's really scary is that it's now moved into the area where even the judicial system, the judges, some of the judges, I'm not saying all, I'm saying probably a tiny minority, but there are judges in South Africa who are black, who are clearly racist when it comes to making judgments. And I think of Vicky Momberg, the decision to put her behind bars for 3 years with 2 where she was supposed to actually spend 2 behind bars. I think that was the most overt, ridiculous decision ever in South Africa.
It was a complete travesty of justice. I mean, we have, after all, freedom of speech, or we're supposed to have freedom of speech in South Africa. It's guaranteed by the Constitution. If it incites violence, but nothing in what she said incited violence or made an appeal for anybody to visit violence upon any other person.
Right.
It was absolutely ridiculous. And we see this, what you're describing, this notion, we even see it in the Constitutional Court. I mean, the Constitutional Court's ruling against Afrikaans in the so-called Gelyke Kanse case, it's absolutely gobsmacking. it's once again a travesty of justice.
Right. Yeah, now look, it is absolutely crazy. And then if you look at the police, there's that classic image of that woman walking her dog with 3 police cars arresting her, well, 7 police and 3 police cars arresting her. And then on the other hand, you have blatant looting going on while the police just watch and do nothing. You know, there seems to be a complete disconnect between the way the white population in particular are treated and the black population are treated by these law enforcement agencies in South Africa.
Yes, and in the irony, I absolutely agree with you, absolutely. And the irony being this, that the whites in South Africa are naturally law-abiding people.
Exactly.
And the other day, I live in a small town in the Eastern Free State. The other day, I took a drive to the shops during the lockdown. There was not one police car or one police officer in town, yet all the people were in their homes. They weren't even in their backyards. They were in their homes quietly and obediently performing whatever they should during the lockdown. I mean, they just such law-abiding people. Whereas the Black Township across what we would call the big road from us, it's business, it's life as usual there. They're whooping it up.
Yeah.
And I bet you there's quite a police presence there. But I agree with you. It's so easy for them to pick on the white people. The irony being that this is the segment of the population which really has a natural inclination to obey the law. But I'll say this as well. It's just as well. Let them treat us like that, so that white people can at last see that we don't belong among them, that they don't feel anything for us, they're not going to look after us, we are on our own. We've got to realize that.
Right, and especially in these hard times like right now with the lockdown, there are so many white people who are starving, and yet when it comes to the food parcels, they're being left out of the distribution.
Wasn't that just awful? I mean, that is so odious. Can you imagine tax-paying people in this country are being excluded from getting food parcels because of the color of their skin? Isn't this exactly what they were supposed to be protesting against before 1994? Well, and I'll tell you this,
yeah.
if the situation, if we had this situation pre-1994, you can bet your bottom dollar the National Party would have done everything they could, and they would have spent more money on feeding the black population than they would have on the white population. I guarantee you that.
Well, look at all the schools that were built for the black population. But
there you go.
Yeah. Now, getting back to how the whites in South Africa are being treated by not all the police and not all the judges, but certainly an element within the police and an element within the judges. One of the last stages before a genocide is actually recognized is when the government agencies themselves start persecuting a particular group within a country. And that's happening right now in South Africa. And I think that's level 9. I think then level 10 is the recognition of a genocide. So we've gone way up to the top of a point where there is actually a genocide being prepared against the white population.
Sure. I can absolutely see that it's moving in that direction. I can see that the measures are being put in place. We're already getting, and we have been for a while, in the so-called cockroach stage, where we are being insulted and accused of everything imaginable. But I'm not disheartened, and I'll tell you why. I am very skeptical about this government's, about their ability to implement anything on a large scale. What I do want to say is, if they think genocide is a good idea, let them come. They will find out it's not going to be easy. They're going to find out it's it's an impossibility in South Africa.
Okay, now talking about that, at what point do you think? Because I know the farmers, they're gatvol. Okay, I mean they're just saying, give us an excuse and we'll respond. What point do you think that the white people in South Africa will wake up to what is going on? Because there's clearly two very different groups of white people in South Africa. You've got those who realize that something is wrong, and they're preparing, they're prepping, they're making sure that they have got a plan B. And then you've got the other group who say, oh no, everything's fine, there's nothing happening here, this is a nothing burger. Now, when do that second group, or the last group I talked about, who think that everything is just fine, wake up? What's got to happen?
I think the process has already started, because often I'm talking to people who used to be very liberal in their thoughts, and have all of a sudden woken up to the fact that, hey, maybe everything is not as kosher as we've been thinking it is, and they're coming to the conclusion we are now, and we've got to look after each other. So it's happening already. The first group, the conservative group, the concerned group, their ranks are swelling. More and more people are joining them. On the other side of the coin, you have people, really at the extreme end of it, you have people who still won't believe it, even when they're bashing down his front door, streaming in with their pick handles and their pangas. Even at that point, you still have people who will deny even the reality as observed by their senses. It makes me think of what was the chap's name, Adam Streum, of the brown shirts in Nazi Germany.
Right.
When Hitler decided to wipe out the SA, to consolidate his power, when they, kicked down his door and dragged him from bed, he shouted at them, well, just let the Führer know, just let the Führer know. But this was on Hitler's orders. Even at that late stage, he still believed it won't happen to him.
Yeah.
And so there are people who will never wake up to this before it's too late.
Okay, now talking about the rallying point for white survival, Afrikaans, you think that is basically central to white survival, don't you?
I think so. Yes, well, particularly for the Afrikaner. Scott, you know your history. You know how important the Taal has been to the Afrikaner throughout his history.
Yes.
The last, let's say, 150 years. I mean, for the last 150 years, we've been perpetually embroiled in some kind of Taal strait or language struggle, and we even went to war, or at least we prolonged the war. During the Anglo-Boer War, after the first phase of the war, or second phase of the war, when, by that time Roberts' army had just streamed into South Africa, taken both capitals, Bloemfontein and Pretoria. The Boer forces were more or less defeated. They rallied and they returned to the battlefield, this time during the guerrilla war.
Right.
And their decision brought immense misery to the country. I mean, it was only then that the concentration camp and the scorched earth policy really kicked off. But one of the main reasons that kept them in the veld is they did not want to lose their independence, because they knew, or they were afraid to lose their language. By that time already, the Afrikaans had been suppressed in the Cape, and they feared the same thing would happen. So the Afrikaner will fight for his Taal. Right now, the language is under immense pressure again. We don't have an Afrikaans university left anymore. It's under pressure in the schools. Everywhere the ANC is trying to just squash Afrikaans. But they're finding it very difficult to do. Well, it's a tough nut to crack, because Afrikaans, in fact, is having a jolly good time. I mean, the Afrikaans singers sell millions of records.
Right.
Afrikaans music dominates in South Africa. Afrikaans literature is just, looking strong and so on. So the taal is surviving, and that is a rallying point for all of us, for the Afrikaner, is to say, as long as Afrikaans is there, I'll be there, and I'll keep on keeping on.
Okay, now where does this leave the white English-speaking South Africans then?
I'm glad you asked this, Scott. I grew up, as I said, on the East Rand, and I grew up in a very Afrikaans part of the East Rand. By that time, certainly there were still some hard feelings, I think, about the Anglo-Boer War, although it was dissipating. And I grew up with, a very warped impression of English-speaking people in South Africa, because I just didn't know them. It's only when I went to the army that I met English-speaking South Africans, or the Wessars, we would call them, or white English-speaking South Africans. In fact, I became part of a platoon, a very exclusive, if not, well, we're certainly not an elite platoon, but we were an exclusive platoon, and we still have reunions. Half of that platoon is English-speaking. And I've always said, I'll go to war anytime, for whatever reason, as long as I can have my platoon mates. And I mean, not only the Afrikaans half, but the English half certainly as well. What I learned is the true division in South Africa among the whites, it isn't English or Afrikaans anymore. It is liberal and, let's call it, conservative or nationalist. Those are the two divisions. And I'd much rather be in the trenches with a conservative Englishman than I would with a liberal Afrikaner.
Right.
So I think that distinction will just evaporate when the struggle begins in earnest.
Talking about liberal Afrikaners, immediately Johann Rupert comes to mind. He clearly does everything for his own financial gain, and he obviously touts up to the politicians, the ANC and all the other political parties. He could do so much more at this time to help starving whites, couldn't he? I mean, the food parcels by the government, as we talked about, have only gone to the blacks. It would cost him nothing. It would be petty cash for Rupert to put his hand in his pocket and say to, non-for-profit organizations, here's 100,000 rand, or here's R1 million, depending on how many people they're looking after, so that they can feed these starving white people. But he's in his own little world, and he does absolutely nothing to help them. What are your views on him?
Well, that kind of capitalist seems to have another loyalty, something very often beyond that of his country. Capitalists are really, first of all, really loyal to their own fortunes, and I just see it all over the world. I must say, Rupert, in the past, I remember the entire controversy when they discriminated against Afrikaans, that he would pull his advertisements from magazines and so on. So he's always been a bit of a champion for Afrikaans itself. But I do agree with you. At what stage would a person say, listen, I'm a white Afrikaans-speaking person, and I am going to look after white Afrikaans-speaking people? I mean, if Oppenheimer came, if one of the Oppenheimers, Nicky Oppenheimer, came and said, listen, I'm a person with a Jewish background, I'm going to take R1 billion and I'm going to give it to the Jews in South Africa, nobody would say a word.
Yeah.
If some Muslim, a wealthy Muslim person came and said, listen, I'm worried about the situation of the Muslims in South Africa. Here's R1 billion for the Muslims. Everybody would be patting his back. But when a person comes and says, listen, I'm going to look after the white people, all of a sudden it's the greatest horror since Auschwitz. It does not make sense.
No, I totally agree. Now, talking about the starving white population in South Africa, and it's getting absolutely critical. I mean, this government is going to be remembered for the human rights abuses that they have put onto the population. And what I find extraordinary, now you have quite a close association with the media in South Africa, is how the media, in particular in South Africa, are fake news. They completely cover up any story that doesn't fit their narrative.
Absolutely.
So
this is so true.
What are your views on that?
Well, talk about shame that will be apportioned afterwards, and certainly in the mainstream media in South Africa. And I must, in this instance, I must point especially towards the Afrikaans media. If you ask me who seduced the Afrikaans population, who misled the South African population in the 90s to vote yes in that disastrous referendum, it was more the Nasionale Pers than it was the Nasionale Partij. It is really a horror, but I think that they're losing steam because of the internet. I think other news outlets have at least there is a sliver of an opportunity. They are creating platforms. For instance, what you are doing is of such immense value because it gives an alternative voice. It is a megaphone through which the message can be heard, and this is happening more and more. I think the media has overplayed its hand. It is losing its credibility, and in fact, we didn't lose any wars. We did, and nobody beat us, except in this one area of propaganda. We lost the propaganda war and we lost everything. And for us to get our freedom, our independence, we will need to really get in the game as far as propaganda is concerned. And we are. But we not only need to participate in the game, we need to win this war this time around.
The only trouble is, Gustav, is that the ANC government are now starting to bring in censorship, like with the coronavirus, and we'll get onto the coronavirus in a minute. If you report something from South Africa, which they decide is fake, they can actually put you inside for 6 months. Now, isn't that a real trigger? It's a bridge too far. It's a real concern that they're now actually starting to do that. Shut people up, make people scared to talk.
Yeah, it's a horror, isn't it? It is such an overreach. I mean, there wasn't anything as draconian during the National Party rule. But let me say this. All of us are involved with the question of gaining our independence, our freedom. And it is not going to come without a struggle. We're going to have to fight for this, and I don't necessarily mean an armed insurrection, and I would certainly not advocate anybody to think along those lines.
Right.
But it's going to take sacrifice, and it's going to take decisive action. Now, if they can lock us up for telling the truth about Corona or for having any opinion whatsoever, and we tolerate it, then we deserve to be repressed in this country. We deserve to be under their heels. I've all along, for the last 26 years, I've maintained we do have self-determination. We white South Africans, we have it right now. Right now we are exercising that self-determination by being okay with the ANC rule, by tolerating it. The moment we say we're not all right with it anymore and we do something about it, it will end. They are not capable of stopping us. They're powerless to stop us. But right now,
so you think there are enough? You think there are enough white people in South Africa to actually change things?
Well, you know, there are what, let's say 4.5 million of us. That would put us, if we should all assemble in one country, the 4.5 million of us, which won't happen, but if we all banded together, that would make us the 128th most populous country in the world.
Right.
We will be in the same bracket as, say, Singapore or New Zealand, round about there. Now, if you just take New Zealand, and I think that should be a very close comparison.
Right.
Now, New Zealand, they're more or less the same population. They have a gross domestic product. Their GDP is 204 billion American dollars per year. Their per capita income per year, their per capita GDP, I should say, is 42,000 American dollars.
Right.
So that's a thriving country. There's no reason why we can't repeat that over here. If you take Singapore, for instance, Singapore's they're more populous than us, but it really is still more or less a city on an island.
Right.
And they are hugely successful economically. For us to have self-determination and have a sustainable country, first of all, we must see that we can look after our security, and I'm sure we will be able to do that. And second of all, we need to have some kind of economy. Our economy should be robust and should be thriving, and I'm pretty sure it will be if we look at the example of New Zealand. So yes, there are plenty enough of us.
Right. Now, one of the things that I find extraordinary in these times with the coronavirus or COVID-19 is the way the ANC have actually brought in this lockdown. It's the hardest lockdown anywhere in the world, and clearly, as you said at the very start or earlier in this discussion, how the white population obeys the law. So they go and sit in their houses like they're told. Now, clearly, and I understand that there's circumstances why a lot of the black population in the townships can't sit in their houses because there are just too many living in one shack. I get
Yes.
that, which by itself makes the whole idea of social distancing, which is really the foundation of a lockdown. It's keeping yourself away from other people so the virus doesn't spread. Now, you can't do it. It can't
No.
work. It cannot work.
No.
And I believe that what I'm hearing now is that the actual death rate from this virus is tiny, and it's people who are unhealthy, the elderly, people who are basically, if they got the flu, the same thing would happen to them as if they got COVID-19. Now, there are a lot of reports by Stanford, by professors in Germany who studied this whole situation, and they're basically saying that this virus there's nothing to worry about. You know, they should just let it happen, just let it go through like the flu, because it's going to do that anyway. What are your views on that?
Well, it's, I think the coronavirus in itself is not a factor. The worst projections I've seen about South Africa shows that if the thing runs its course, the worst that can happen, the worst case scenario is we'll have 250,000 people die. Now, 250,000 dead people, that's nothing to sneeze at. I get that. But in 2005, 280,000 people died of AIDS in South Africa.
Right.
And we never broke stride. It was, a lot was written about it, but certainly there wasn't an economic meltdown, and There wasn't a national grieving period or anything. We just took the punch and we carried on. And I'm pretty sure right now we can't deal with the coronavirus because we don't know what we're talking about. We don't know how many people are infected, and we don't know how many people will die of the infections, and so forth. But that to one side, the most important thing about the corona phenomenon is what is happening in politics. It's the political fallout from this. Now, the ANC got away with the initial 3-week lockdown period.
Right.
In fact, Ramaphosa's approval rating skyrocketed. He was all of a sudden seen as
the great leader.
Yes, the great leader, the commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
You know, the big man in Africa. He appeared in uniform and so on. But the extension already was an overreach, and the way that they want to step it down from phase 5 to phase 4 and so forth, it is an overreach, and it will come back to haunt them. Now, the reason for that being, it will turn their followers against them. They are entering a scenario where very conceivably they can go to war with their own followers. And as we know, that always means the end of a political movement, is when they not only lose their followers, but when they become antagonistic towards their followers. So I think we look back at Corona as really as the beginning of the end of the ANC.
You know, I absolutely agree with you. I've been talking about this in a very similar manner. I think what will happen as the lockdown extends, I think there's going to be absolute anarchy. I think you can already see police vehicles being burnt, police being stoned. You know, they're having to run back to the police station, a sort of car in there, and the wider African population have completely lost respect for the police in South Africa. And, you know, if the police lose control of the streets, I think that will be the moment in time where the black population will turn against the ANC. And I'm talking about the councillors. I think they're going to be targeted. I think the politicians will be targeted, because the black population will say, hey, you know, we've been here for 26 years. You've done nothing for us. All you've done is enrich yourselves. And I think the black population is hurtful too.
Absolutely, and you can't blame them. I know this about personal survival. The more dire your situation becomes, the shorter your focus becomes. The man who has food for only one day, he's not looking forward to tomorrow. He's not trying to figure out what's happening tomorrow. He's trying to figure out what's happening later today.
Yeah.
The focus is very short term. When things now escalate, and when things become, when things deteriorate, that's what I should say.
Right.
The black people are not going to be thinking about white monopoly capital or the Guptas or load shedding or anything. They are going to think about the last great upheaval in their lives, and that will be the lockdown. And they will blame the lockdown on the ANC. And how will the ANC contain this? They don't have any real power, and this is the real difference between South Africa and Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe had real power. He had the veterans, and he had the 5th Brigade, and he had the police and so on, who were all very capable. It was a very capable security apparatus. We don't have that in South Africa. The ANC can only project power. But the problem with the projection of power is when it is tested and they find out there's nothing behind it. Then it really is the beginning of the end.
Yeah. Well, the ill discipline of the army, which is self-evident when you look at what's happened. You know, some people have actually been killed in townships, and the way they demean people who might just be walking around just like everybody else. It's quite evident that the police are just they have no real discipline. It's like they're a power unto themselves. And when you don't have discipline, you don't actually have an army. You just have a group of thugs walking around the place.
Well, that is very true. And I mean, this army of ours, I think the average age of a soldier in the South African National Defence Force is closing in on 45 years of age.
Right.
That is very old to be a modern soldier. And don't get me started on their lack of discipline. I went to visit my old army base some time ago. I was appalled. I mean, apart from the place in typical New South Africa just falling apart, the attitude of those soldiers. I was accompanied by a major, and we would walk past riflemen, ordinary troops, camped out on, really there on the ground. They'd taken off their boots. They were just lolling about, and we would walk past them. A major would walk past them. They would not even say hello to him. They won't. I mean, in my time, if you saw an officer, and I'm not even talking about a major, if I saw a second lieutenant, I had to get up on my feet. I had to snap to attention, and I had to salute him.
Yeah.
Or else there would be all kinds of repercussions. These guys would not even glance in his direction. Now, you want to tell me these guys, this kind of soldiers equipped to go into battle? I tell you what, forget about it. They will be on a hiding for nothing. They will be whooped in any kind of contact.
Right. Now, one thing that is so clear is that this dream of the Rainbow Nation was never going to happen under an ANC government. I mean, they clearly have their own aims and own outcomes that they're moving towards. And as we're talking about the coronavirus and things becoming more chaotic in South Africa, let's talk hypothetically. Let's say that the ANC does collapse and the black population rise up against the ANC. I think, unfortunately, the whites will be collateral damage. At what point, when the ANC collapse, should, and I think setting up a territory like the Western Cape is the answer for a group like the white population. They might have other areas like in Gauteng, which aren't necessary in the cities where there's going to be a lot of trouble. But when do you think that point comes with the ANC's demise for the whites to actually set up their own territories?
Well, of course, that is the one question that is really had us scratching our heads for so long. Is when at long last will people realize the danger and start doing something about it? And it's difficult for me to speculate, but it's a continuum. Somewhere along the line, the situation will become so dire and self-preservation so urgent that people will just consolidate naturally. I think what will happen is I really don't see, apart from the Western Cape, and that's a possibility, but for the rest of South Africa, I don't see white people just taking huge chunks or, demarcating regions and occupying it. I think it will happen from suburb to suburb, town to town, and eventually they'll be linked together and they'll form some kind of cohesive territory. But things have changed a lot over the last, let's say, 50 years with the current form of the Industrial Revolution we have. The reasons for the existence of the unitary state have started disappearing. Now it's conceivable to have a town of, say, 30,000 people very well able to defend itself, to have its own economy, to be, for all intents and purposes, be independent. And I think that's what will happen.
Right.
And it will come about in this whole vacuum, this whole void left by the collapse of the ANC.
Right. Now, let's talk about the geography of self-determination.
Yes, and that is exactly it. When we started discussing these things, I know Dan Root, he was more or less one of the first people to really say, how are we going to do this? If we want to have an independent Afrikaner Republic or White Republic in South Africa, how are we going to go about it? And I mean, he's a very resourceful chap, and he came up with some very innovative ideas. Buying a piece of Botswana, occupying an island. Also, the thing is just what's making all of this very difficult is to move people, is to finding a piece of land. That's one thing, but to move 10,000, 100,000, million people there is almost impossible for us. So that's why I think things will start happening organically. But if I can just veer off slightly and get back to the negotiations in the 1990s, self-determination was certainly a discussion point. And F.W. de Klerk, and I'm taking the name hesitantly into my mouth, but F.W. de Klerk, he just dismissed it by asking, he would say, "Meneer, wys my jou kaart." In other words, "Sir, show me your map." Meaning, if we gave you a Volksstaat, where will this Volksstaat be? Show me on a map. But truly, he was our leader. He's supposed to come to us with a map and say, this is what we devised. This is what we figured out. This is going to be our homeland. What do you think about it? And we could say yes, no, argue about it, whatever. But it was up to him to find that region and to demarcate it and to negotiate it.
Right.
And he didn't.
Right. Now I'm going to be
talking. Now we are.
I'm going to be talking to Dan Root tomorrow night. Funny enough, at 8 p.m. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. Now,
well, let me just say this about Dan Root. As far as I'm concerned, he's the best political thinker, the most incisive political thinker in South Africa.
Right.
So you'll have a good conversation with him, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, talking about Dan, okay, now he's not a politician. I think one of the great problems in South Africa right now amongst the white community, there's no working together. There's no Eendracht maakt macht. You've got groups like Suidlanders who say, no, we're not going to work with any other groups. And you've got ULA, and you've got Boerelishi, and you've got all these little groups who, if they could actually work together, they would have a better chance of doing something. But apparently that's not in the question. I find that extraordinary.
Well, it's something I hear very often, is that the Afrikaners are not capable of sticking together, and people always come up with this image where they're saying, if you have 5 Englishmen being marooned on an island, you'll have 5 shops, and if you have 5 Italians, you'll have 5 restaurants, and if you have 5 Afrikaners, you will have 5 churches and 5 political parties, that type of thing. That's being said to me often. It's not really like that. I mean, we stuck together from 1899 to 1902 and gave the biggest empire on the globe a run for its money on the battlefield. So we really stuck together then. And let's not forget, from 1948, we stuck together and kept the National Party in power for 46 years, ultimately to our detriment, but still we stuck together. Right now, I think the timing is probably not right for the arrival, for the ascent of a strong charismatic leader. If ever there's a people being absolutely disappointed in their leaders, by being disaffected by their leaders, it's the Afrikaners. So we're very skeptical of this one person that will come. we put all our eggs in a basket. We all followed the National Party and see how disastrous that outcome was. But I would agree. I would say this. I was watching Brexit, the whole Brexit process,
Right.
and I learned something from Nigel Farage there. Is you can't have something if you don't demand it. So 27 years earlier, he started demanding independence from or breakaway from the European Union by Britain. He started demanding it. Right now, we're not demanding anything. Well, that is something I think we need to address. I think we need to start demanding our freedom, self-determination. And my proposal would be for a triumvirate of prominent Afrikaans people, activists, to just go to government and say, we're not here to ask, we're not here to negotiate, we are here to demand. We're saying we want our freedom, we want our self-determination. You've been put on notice. And I would certainly nominate Dan as one of them, and I would certainly nominate Steve Hofmeyer as the other. And there are quite a few choices for the third. But I think three, we should. That sounds about right to me. And they should just go and say, we will have it.
Well,
and eventually we will have it.
Well, Granny Green really hit the nail on the head, and she says in 2 words, no leadership. Now, while I'm talking about the side chat, please, guys, if you've got questions you want to put to Gustav, please just put them in any time. The moderators will copy them and paste them later so I can present those to Gustav. So anytime, just put your questions in here. Now, getting back to what is going to happen in South Africa, I hear a lot of people now talking about like it's almost like a self-enforced apartheid, where you've got white groups forming or getting together in a particular part of a town or something like that, and basically setting up their own little area. And also we got this talk about de-urbanization,
yes,
moving out towards the rural areas and stuff like that. Tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm all for it. I mean, I live in a really small town in the Eastern Free State, and we're loving it, and we'll never move back to the city again. But apart from the lifestyle being great, it makes sense. Because over here, we certainly know we can look after our security. We've actually had exercises here where we would close off the town, have a rapid response situation, and so on. And we know we can look after ourselves. We are self-sustaining here. We have all the water we need. They can cut off all our food supplies. We'll still have food. Plenty of farmers around here. And so we'll never have famine here. That is for certain. But it also makes the next little step towards self-determination possible, because it won't be long now, and we will more or less have taken over the municipality, and we would have done it legally, in legal ways.
Right.
We will. The municipality, as is in just about any other municipality in South Africa, the municipality is not fulfilling its duties. So we can declare a dispute, and while that dispute is running, they cannot collect taxes from us, or rates and taxes from us. So we can pay that money into a trust account, and we can start looking after ourselves.
Right.
We can start managing the town again.
Well,
And from there, it's the road is open to proper self-determination.
right. Now, one thing that is just so blindingly obvious, and people just don't talk about it, is that giving control of South Africa, which was run like a well-oiled machine, I mean, it was just running so beautifully, to a group of people under the ANC banner who are completely incompetent and don't know what they're doing, you could see it wasn't going to work. I don't get how this actually happened in the first place.
Well, you know what? This is one of the saddest stories, I think. We had these two forces in South Africa. You know, in very simplistic terms, let's say we had the blacks against the whites. We dominated them in every area. I mean, as far as productivity, education, prosperity, in every sense we dominated. And there was one area in which they were much stronger than us, and they would always be. And that is, there were just more of them than us. So numerically, they would always be dominant. And sure enough, what did we go and do? We said, we're going to take everything, and we're going to make it dependent of just this one factor. Whoever is more takes all. I mean, it must have been the stupidest thing ever done by any people in the history of the world. And now we have a democracy, but this democracy is a failed democracy. Now, one of the reasons is there are no requirements to take part in this democracy apart from the very basic stuff like being a citizen and being older than 18 years. That's all you require to participate in the democratic process.
Right.
No knowledge is required. Now, I lived on a farm for 18 years, and I got to observe people. I was in a great position to observe people, and there was this one chap on the farm in his late 20s, but he was mentally challenged. So he was healthy, tall, strapping young man, very healthy. He couldn't speak. He could only make a grunt, sort of. Mm-hmm. And all he would do the entire day is pretend he's a motor car. He would have a lid of a can, or he would have a pot or something that he would be twirling in his hands like a steering wheel, and he'll make the noise of a car, more or less. And he'd drive up and down, pretend he's a car. Now, if we take that young man and we can show him on a ballot sheet what the ANC logo looks like, and we can train him to draw a cross next to that ANC ballot, he can go and vote, and his vote will neutralize the vote of the best philosophy in South Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that make sense?
Doesn't.
It doesn't. There should be a requirement. There should at least be a test. I am absolutely convinced that not 5% of the ANC's followers can tell you what the difference is between communism, capitalism, socialism. They won't be able to tell you what is GDP, what levels state debt is running at. They know nothing about that. And yet they are taking the ultimate decision about all of that. So democracy is a huge disaster. And it will always, this kind of democracy that we're having here right now, not only in South Africa, in fact worldwide, where they are democratic countries. If knowledge is not a requirement of democracy, then democracy is bound to fail. Socrates posed this question to he was in a debate about democracy, and he wasn't mad about democracy. And he said, if you're on a ship that is in a storm at night, close to a rocky shore, who would you like to be in charge of that ship, to man that ship? Ordinary people or people who've been trained to run that ship? And obviously, you want the trained sailors to operate that ship. But then we get to democracy and we say, well, listen, you need qualifications to run a ship. You need qualifications to drive a car. But you don't need qualifications to participate in democracy. It makes no sense at all. Mm.
I think the only time post-1994 that the politics actually worked was during the transition period, when you had equal power between the National Party, or the white politicians, and the black politicians or the ANC, because you then had some adults in the room who could actually steer things in the right direction. I think what's actually happened now is that you've got the children running the classroom, and of course it's going to be a disaster.
It has to be. It inevitably has to be a disaster. The government of national unity was never going to fly. They got some minor cabinet posts, and they were just drowned out right from the start.
Right.
Pitzel here, the famous newspaper man, editor of the 60s, he made this perceptive observation. He says the story of South Africa can be told in the light of two indispensable but opposing rights. The right of black people to be free, opposing the right of white people to be safe, to survive. So it is freedom of black people against survival of white people. And in all honesty, there was only one system ever trying to accommodate both these rights, and that was apartheid. Apartheid at least said, we're going to try and arrange for something for everybody, whereas the ANC's approach is everything for us and nothing for you.
Right.
So obviously the system is doomed.
Yeah. Now, someone's raised a really interesting point here, and that's Johannes Badenhorst. He says, wouldn't it be a great idea if all the white taxpayers just said, no, not going to do it, not going to pay any tax? It would bring the ANC down.
It would in a heartbeat. It's just a tax revolt is very difficult to arrange, and if there's a way that we could do it, certainly we pay tax as our part of the contract. There's a contract between the ANC and the citizens of this country, and the ANC has definitely broken their contract. They've squandered our money, they've embezzled it, through corruption, they've lost trillions of it. They haven't looked after the country, they've had infrastructure just crumbling, so they haven't performed their part of the bargain. So morally, certainly we are not only entitled, I would argue that we are obliged to keep back our taxes. It's just not that easy. How would you go about it?
Well, if everybody, and I know it's impossible to do this, but if everybody just said, like at the end of this month, that's it, I'm not going to pay any tax.
Well, the problem is mostly, and I think there are some people who are in a position to do that, but many people have their taxes deducted as part of the pay-as-you-earn system.
Right.
So it'd be very difficult to arrange that. I certainly think it would be a good idea, and I think we're entitled to it.
Well, it's quite extraordinary when I just look at all the systems in place in South Africa. They all came not after 1994, but pre-1994. That's when the model was created, and this is a model that's been used by the ANC and the black population, and yet they're so quick to point a finger at apartheid and say, well, it's apartheid's fault this is happening, or apartheid's fault that's happening. And you look at the complete, it's a disgusting state that just about everything the ANC involved in is in right now. You take the public hospitals, absolute disgrace.
It is.
You can't see anything that they've actually done right with the systems that they were given back in 1994. What they've done is they've just wrecked the whole thing. So, what chance is there of them ever getting South Africa moving forward in a good direction?
Oh no, it's never going to happen. They're just not equipped to do it. If they can, they won't, and if they want to, they can't. It's not going to happen. Apartheid to them is the most glorious thing. Listen, I mean, You remember in Forrest Gump how we would just rhapsodize about the name of the girl. What was her name? You would just call her name. Now,
Yeah,
you know,
I'm not sure.
And that will bring a joy to my mind. Name slipped my mind right now.
Right.
But that is what the ANC is for the ANC. Apartheid is for the ANC. It is just it is the sweetest, most lovely, most wonderful name to them. It's their one-armed bandit. They just say the word apartheid, pull the lever, and ka-ching, ka-ching, money starts coming out.
Right.
If they do something wrong, they just say apartheid, and it covers up all their sins. If they don't perform, they just say apartheid, and it's all done.
Yeah.
They won't be able to exist without the word apartheid in their vocabulary.
Right. So they're basically playing the victim card the whole time.
Oh, they have nothing else.
Yeah.
Right now, you know, they have to consider where they came from. First of all, really the only thing that they have to offer on the open market internationally is their misery. People will buy their misery. You know, they'll say, look how persecuted we were, and they'll get money. You know, so as long as they're victims, they'll get money. But that is the only product they have to offer on the open market. And that product is getting pretty stale, I think.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, one of the questions I really think sums up what we're talking about here is, why did democracy fail in South Africa?
Well, for the reasons that I have described, is you can't have a population taking part in a democratic process if they haven't been educated in that process.
Right.
If they don't understand how democracy is working, if they don't understand what every party stands for, what the differences are between the parties, what that party's track record has been, and so on, how can they make an informed decision? Because it's really, you're always going to get the worst of decisions from the masses in an instance like this. I wrote a kiddies novel, John D. Jones Takes God, and it's a fantasy novel, and part of it takes place on an island that is ruled by a council. But they've come up with a novel idea. They go around the island and they pick the stupidest people they can find and put them on this council, on this ruling council. But there's a twist. Every decision made by this council, the people just do the opposite. The argument being a stupid person is more often wrong than a clever person is right. The problem with the ANC is they more or less have that system, but without the twist. So we're always going to get the most stupid of decisions in this country, and we are going to follow that decision. We're going to enforce it.
Right.
It can't work.
Right. Okay, I'm going to address the people watching right now. We've had up to about 500 people watching. We've got well over 400 at the moment, about 450. Now, please, guys, if you want to start putting your questions in, that's fine. Jaco, Marlena, Erica, if you've got any questions that you've copied, if you just want to throw them into the side chat now, we'll start taking questions from those people who are watching. And I'll just carry on talking while you're doing that. Now, one of the areas we haven't talked about yet, Gustav, is the impact of black economic empowerment on the persecuted white community. Now, what I find very disturbing is a lot of financial experts have said that affirmative action and BEE and BBBEE have got to be removed. They've got to be got rid of if this economy is going to survive after the lockdown. And what Ramaphosa is basically saying, well, he's actually going to make it even harder. What are your thoughts about the impact of BEE on the economy in South Africa, pre the lockdown and how it'll actually destroy the economy post lockdown?
Well, of course, the race-based economic policies have been a disaster. I mean, completely. So, if you just think about all the people that have been forced to emigrate from South Africa, all the professional people, all the entrepreneurs and so on,
Yeah,
that have
brain
taken
drain.
probably millions of jobs with them. You know, it's a question of the golden, or of the goose laying the golden eggs. Why would you wring its neck? If these people were just a little bit cleverer than they are, they would have just let white people carry on just doing their jobs, just innovating, starting businesses and so on, and this economy would have been roaring and it would have been to the benefit of everybody.
Yeah.
But they just couldn't leave well alone. As far as the impact on the white communities, of course it's sad. I mean, I know so many people who lost their careers, so many people who had to start jobs. One of my best friends worked for ISCOR, and he was very good at his job. He was an engineer, but
Right.
he lost his job all of a sudden. So he started making burglar bars and so on, and he did it very well. But the problem was, everybody that was retrenched in his area bought a welding machine and started making burglar bars. So eventually he couldn't make a living that way. The market was crowded. So he ended up baking rusks, biscuit. I mean, he eventually had 4 or 5 stoves in his garage, and he would bake rusks. Now, this is a well-trained, very capable person baking rusks, and I would always take my hat off to him for not taking it lying down and making a plan to look after his family. But what a loss to the economy. So that part of it I find very tragic, but I'll say this for white South Africans, or to white South Africans. Listen, it's just as well. Let's just forget about the idea that government is going to look after us in any way, help us in any other way, not interfere. We are on our own. The sooner we get the message that we are on our own, the sooner we'll work our way towards our own freedom. So even the poor white question, it's not up to government. I mean, sure it is, but they're not going to look after them. It's up to us. We need to find ways to look after our poor people.
Right. Okay, now I've got a whole bunch of questions here for you from the side chat. I'll start putting those to you, Gustav. Boerevegter has said, Gustav, what is your opinion about Sinef and Rensburg and your time frame of when the ANC will fall and we Boers will get our freedom back? 10, 20, 30 years?
No, let me start at the latter part of the question. No, it's upon us. I firmly believe that we are already seeing the glimmers of it. I would say within 5 years we are going to have some form of self-determination in pockets in this country. I don't see the ANC surviving another 5 years. I really don't. And when the ANC is not there anymore, it will mean anarchy. The government would be totally irrelevant, and every community will have to look after itself. And that's when our independence really will start taking shape.
Right, so there won't be a central government as such. It'll just be communities, and it'll really take you back to the Middle Ages, won't you? Because you won't have electricity, you won't have a whole lot of things that you can still have under an operating government.
It's difficult to predict everything, but no, I absolutely see that we will be generating our own electricity. We will find ways, like Orania, alternative electricity sources. We'll run solar panels on, have, I don't know, small hydroelectric mills in rivers, and we are an ingenious people. We will come up with those solutions. I don't think we'll really go back to the Middle Ages. I think a more applicable situation would be, say, the Transvaal of the 1870s. You know, when things just started taking shape. You had all these factions, and they were squabbling, but everybody was busy building, and towns started up, and people started assembling and started building, and you know, I think that's a more probable scenario until we get to the stage where there's nothing common between all these little projects that they will link together and form a more cohesive region. Oh.
Now is Nikki with us tonight? Is Nikki watching the live chat? Because I'll tell you why I'm asking that, Gustav. Because Nikki has got a project where she's setting up areas in rural areas where a small white community is actually settling, and they go and settle there, and it's basically what you're talking about. You've got these little regions that it's an exclusively white community, and they're working together. They help each other. It's sort of like taking things back to as you say, like the 1870s.
Yes, well, that sounds most promising, and she should certainly contact Prague.
I'll let her know.
I'm sure that.
I'll let her know.
I'm sure that's right up our street.
Yeah. Okay, now Boer Effect has asked another question I've just seen here. Wanneer reken... What's happened to it? Sorry, I just won't be as here it is. Leo Vechter. Wanneer reken jy gaan Nag van Lang Messe plaasvind? I think that's the Night of the Long Knives, isn't it?
Night of the Long Knives. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen. It's not that they don't want or that they don't harbor enough ill will to, but I just don't see these people being able to launch such a well-planned, well-coordinated plan. I just don't see it.
Right.
A more probable danger will be a spontaneous uprising, people being hungry and whipping themselves up into a froth and then just spilling over towards us, and then we'll have to look after ourselves. But I'm sure we'll handle it when it comes.
Okay, now Dee's asked, what's scary is if the ANC declares a state of emergency. What is your opinion on that?
Yes, that is a very definite threat. There are a couple of things that I would find daunting. In a state of emergency, if they're going to try and take away the firearms from law-abiding citizens, I think that would be really intimidating. But I also think that could be a trigger for a really stiff resistance. Right.
Now, Gustav's asked, are you and Prague associated with the ULA and Boerelegioen?
Not formally, no. We certainly know of each other, and we have common aims, but there's no formal cooperation as of yet. And I think maybe, the time should come for us to have some sort of council and invite all parties together. I mean, it'll be exhausting, I can just imagine. But maybe the time is coming that we should do something like that.
Yeah, I've actually had a live stream with Dr. Peter Hammond. Do you know Peter Hammond?
Oh, yes, sure, yeah.
I had a live stream with him about a couple of weeks ago now, I guess. And this exact discussion came up about how do we get these groups to have some kind of a, even if they don't work together, they just have like a council where they can sit around a table and just be able to, in a time of crisis, work together and plan together. And Peter said he would be delighted to help set something like that up, and I think he would be the right man to do it, because he's not politically inclined. All he would be doing is, and he's a great negotiator. He's actually been involved in the secession of parts of Africa, like in Sudan and places like that. He's actually been there and been involved in that process. So he's got a tremendous understanding of what you can and can't do.
Yes, no, he would be an obvious choice.
Yeah.
I still very vividly remember an interview I had with him when he was still involved with the signpost movement, frontline movement, signposts, and I had an interview with him, and that was back in 1990. And he always had a very clear vision of where he was going, what he was aiming at, and he certainly he showed a lot of backbone. I mean, I remember the time he was arrested in Mozambique, and put in prison, and he would get up every morning and sing all 4 verses of the stem. That's a staunch fellow.
He told us this most amazing story about being arrested in Zambia, and wow, absolutely disgusting. You think our prisons are disgusting. The way he described them in Zambia, they're just shocking. I don't know how people can live in that. Now,
it's true.
Next question. Clock says, what should white-coloured Indian citizens do now going forward? Any advice?
Well, first thing that we all need to do, all of us, all the minorities, is in our communities, we should make government irrelevant. We should take over our own services, we should look after our own security, and we, as far as we can, generate our own economies. Because the time will come that government will disappear, there will be a void, and then we've got to be ready for it. So that's the obvious place. It's not very glamorous to get stuck into, for instance, municipal politics, but that's certainly what we need to do. We need to make government irrelevant.
Right. Now, Charlotte Smith has asked, do you think the EFF is more dangerous than the ANC? Well, I know what I think.
No, it's almost impossible for me to separate the two of them. Obviously, the ANC is in power. I don't see the EFF ever getting into power through the ballot or any other way. So the problem with the ANC is if there's a demise of the ANC, there'll be a void. But that void won't be filled by a political party. It'll be filled by probably some kind of war faction. What I see after the fall of the ANC is the rise of the warlord situation, the warlord phenomenon.
Like in Sudan.
That we see exactly. Somalia, all over Africa, in fact. I'm right now asking myself this question. If you take Alexandra Township, it's just on the other side of the freeway from Sandton. If you had a warlord even right now, if you had a warlord in Alexandra, some kind of charismatic, forceful leader, how difficult would it be for him to gather a band of, say, 1,000 men, arm them with AK-47s? And if he did that, and he decided one morning to cross that freeway and go into Sandton and go and do his shopping, who will stop him? Because I certainly don't see the police stopping him. So I think we've got to see that the time of the warlord is coming, and we will have to be able to defend ourselves against them. But by that time, either that's what the EFF will become, some kind of war faction with the little round man as the warlord, or else they will also just soak away into the sands of time.
Now, just talking about the demise of the ANC and anarchy coming into South Africa, do you think any country, I'm talking about a first world country, will come in and help settle things down?
That is an interesting question. I don't really. I don't think we register on international radar that prominently. I mean, apartheid made us a talking point, but as far as the world is concerned, it's done and dusted, and they don't want to know. So I don't know that it'll be important enough. And certainly there won't be good commercial reasons to come anymore. Our mining sectors is up the spout, so nobody's going to Russia to get their hands on the gold, I don't think, apart from maybe the Chinese.
No, the Chinese.
Yes, well, the inscrutables. Right. I'm certainly not an expert on the Chinese, but we've got to consider the possibility that they'll take a hand. But I think even the Chinese, when they come, they'll find it much more convenient to have the whites look after themselves, and their dealings will be with the black population, or let's call them the majority population, and they'll loot, and that's the part of the country they will loot. Let me, on that score, say this as well about the way that I see things panning out. What we certainly don't want in our independent regions, we don't want minerals of any kind. We don't want diamonds, gold, platinum, uranium, or anything, because that only brings the vultures.
Yeah.
You look at amazingly prosperous countries like South Korea or Singapore, as I've mentioned, and these are countries without any minerals at all. So we don't need minerals and we don't want them.
Right. Now, Sharon has asked, is a goal without a plan not simply a wish? If everything is going to fall apart, it is not far off. Shouldn't a cohesive and coherent plan be put in place now? A think tank and strategy is step one. I totally agree. What do you think, Gustav?
Of course, it'd be lovely to have a plan of action, have contingency plans and so on. It's just impossible to arrange at this moment because of the fractured nature of our white society. So the best I can hope for is that when it happens, if this vacuum, this power vacuum should come about and the community start looking after them, then I would hope that these communities, because within the communities there are lovely plans, I mean, really very forward-thinking plans, and I find that everywhere. People have the community police forums running, they are looking after every facet of town management and so on. I'm sure each local community will be able to come up with plans, and I think from there'll be an evolution of a more coherent plan involving everybody.
Right. Now, Becky Selle, who I think's got an IQ of about 20 or 25, yes. Personally, he has just prevented neighborhood watches from operating. And he's also done the same thing to the farming community with their groups that go around and protect the farmers. And the thing that I find really concerning, you were talking about Alexandria just now, and the situation if you had a what do they call it, a gun lord or something like that. The problem we have in South Africa, and well, it's the same all over the world, but it's accentuated in South Africa, is we have things like the internet, because through social media, like WhatsApp, for example, you can actually get a group, the black community can get a group together, and at a certain time, and then go and loot a shop, because of the numbers that they have there. So they actually plan it through using social media.
Yes.
And that's clearly what is going on around the country now.
Yes, of course. Well, this is going to happen, and it's going to happen with greater and greater frequency.
So,
but it's yes. I'm sorry.
So when we talk about coordination of groups of whites, for example, isn't the WhatsApp model probably a good way for them to go, because they can sort of get everybody doing a particular task or defending a particular part of the town or something like that just by sending a WhatsApp message?
Oh, I would think most communities already have WhatsApp security groups going. I certainly know we have one. And as I said earlier, we practiced this. We practiced a swift reaction situation. And, minutes later, all the entrances to town were blocked and everybody was deployed according to a prearranged plan. I can mention a town, I don't want to mention its name, but in the Free State. But now recently they had a situation of this kind of crowd being assembled and just absolutely streaming towards the central business district. And these farmers and town people just got in their pickups, very calmly went, they confronted this mob, they had their guns, their shotguns and their pistols with them, and they just stopped it dead in its tracks.
Right.
I mean, there were probably 40 or 50 farmers, and we're talking about a mob of a few thousand. But that mob just stopped right there because they know the farmers.
Yeah,
So,
look, I have to say, I think the biggest thing going for the white population in South Africa is that the black population, when they are being threatened, they're cowards. They run. They don't. If there's a group of them or a gang, they'll do the most terrible things, and we've seen that with the farm attacks. But if they are presented with a force, as you say, of 40 people with guns, they're gonna scatter. They're gonna run. But if it was the other way around, believe me, the Boers would stand their ground and they would take on any force. They wouldn't go running for the hills.
Well, I tell you what, it's a question of some kind of selection, almost a Darwinian selection. For people who have lived in this continent for more than 350 years, certainly only the stouter people survived. I mean, can you imagine back in the 1830s packing up your belongings on a wagon that had to be pulled by 16 oxen and setting off into a place of which there weren't even maps? And I mean, you could never come back. Can you imagine the courage it took?
Absolutely amazing. The Great Trek is just wow.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been dealing with this kind of mob situation now for many, many years. And let me also say this about the black community. If you have a township of 30,000 blacks, there's never going to be a situation where there are 30,000 blacks going to storm, charge the white part of town. It's not going to happen. It's going to be 10% of them, so there'll be 3,000 maybe.
Right.
We always, and I see a lot of black people arguing with me on Twitter, for instance. They always come up with this, but listen, we are 10 times as many as you are. They must just realize it. When it gets down to the firefight, there won't be 10 times as many of them. All of us will be involved because it's for our survival, but not all of them will be involved.
Now, Gordon Blues has asked, where is the army being deployed to?
Well, now this is also a very good question. Now, my understanding of the army and what knowledge I have of military affairs, I can say this. There is no way this army has the logistics capability to deploy 70,000 men. They just don't have the capability. They can't do it. I don't know what Ramaphosa's thinking is. I don't know. So we can forget about 70,000 troops being deployed. They can't do it. They can't feed them when they're out of base. They can't keep them going. They can't transport them. They can't house them. They can't do it. But whatever the number is, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be to predominantly white areas, because that's not where the threat is. The threat against the ANC is not coming from white people. It's coming from black people, their own followers. So that's where the army will be deployed to.
Yeah. I have to say that I think that in the next month we're going to see an absolutely desperate situation happening in South Africa, as starvation is just, it's going to be absolutely tragic.
It is.
Because the ANC, look, really, they're a joke. Now, Jip has asked, Last wants to know what the situation is in the South China Sea. Do you have any thoughts on that, Gustav?
I don't. That's beyond my purview.
Right.
I really don't have an opinion on that.
Yeah. Well, look, I can just say that what's happening in the South China Sea is that the Chinese are building these little islands on, these little rocky outcrops, which are part of the nature of the territory there. And they're arming them, and they're becoming like military bases. And they're basically claiming then the territory around them as their territory. And the Americans are not impressed with this at all. They're actually very concerned about it, because it's extending China right into right up to the borders of countries like Indonesia, and it's not a good position.
It's a concern.
Yeah.
It's a concern.
Yeah.
Well, what I would say of China is, I think China would like to have a big old dust-up. Because of their one-child policy, which they don't have anymore, but which they had. They've got 70 million surplus men in that country.
Right.
Surely they would like to get, I don't say get rid of them, but certainly bring their numbers down. And a war would be an obvious choice, or a virus.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, I think the really interesting strategy that China's got is they've made basically Xi Jinping the leader for life. So it's not like in a democracy like in the USA, where they have a different president every 8 years or 4 years. So the actual direction China is going in is going to be so solid. Whereas America, what you tend to have is the Democrats in and the Republicans in, and they're always changing direction, and that is the worst possible thing you can do to the stability of a country.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I think certainly China it is vulnerable in certain areas. I think the economy is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And running a country with 1.3 billion people must be a huge challenge.
Now,
must be difficult.
Lely Tussen die Doorings. Now that's an interesting username. Lely Tussen die Doorings has asked,
Lily among thorns.
do you think the ANC deliberately ruined the country in order to instate the socialist system, or do you think it's just happened because of their incompetency?
Well, I think both. I think certainly the incompetence wrecked the economy and so on. But I think it suits them. It suits this whole national democratic revolution of theirs, and even famine. It's been an old, trick, stock in trade for Marxist countries. I mean, if you look what Stalin did, how he used famine to consolidate his power. When a country is in the grip of famine, the one with the food, the one who controls the supply of food, obviously, he's the king of the country. His power is paramount. So I think it suits them, sure.
Right. Now, Erica's asked, John Jefferson asked, does Gustav not think the New World Order will support the ANC?
It's difficult for me to see how they would. What is left of the ANC? Once again, I'm certainly not an expert on the New World Order. I can just see what's unfolding, and I have to make my plans based on what I can see happening.
Right.
And the mechanics of the situation right in front of me. And on that score, I can see the ANC just folding like a deck chair. And it's the same as asking, will some foreign country intervene and bail out the ANC? And I don't think that would happen. I think, in fact, the New World Order would probably like a fractured and unbalanced,
a soft target.
South Africa, in the grip of anarchy. Well, it's a country that's easy to subdue then, or at least it's not a country you can expect much mischief from.
Okay, now I've got one final question in my list here, guys. If there are more questions, please just cut and paste them, because we'll be shutting down the live stream in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So now's the chance to post those questions before we do. Now, Settler Boy has asked, tribal war in townships might also flare up between the Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, etc. Hungry and desperate people tend to group with their own tribes for support. Could this happen?
Oh, well, it's inevitable, absolutely. And this is what it's all about. We're living in an artificial union. We had all these parts, all these diverse parts that were just lumped together in 1910. All these tribes, all these factions, and they've been kept as a union. They were unified by only one thing, and that's the power of government. Government was strong enough to keep them together. But the glue that's keeping them together, government, in short, is getting to be really brittle. And when that glue really dries up, when it loses its bonding properties, the whole union is going to fly apart, and it will be tribe against tribe. It will be Zulu against Zulu, and it will be tribes within the Zulu nation against other tribes in the Zulu nation, and so on, down to block level in the townships. I can guarantee you that.
Right. Well, I was involved in. I lived in Greytown in the 1970s.
Then you'd know.
Well, the faction fights on the Tugela River were just horrific. My mother was the PA to the mayor of Greytown. And he would get the reports from the police where, especially over Christmas when they went home from Johannesburg or the mines or whatever, and there would be some dispute between two little villages, and the men from the one village in the middle of the night would get their pangas and they would literally go and kill everybody in the other village with their pangas. It was just absolutely crazy. But burn the place down. This is not happening in the 1800s. This was happening in the 1970s. I'm pretty sure it's still happening today.
I would imagine. Huh?
Yeah.
And it certainly escalated when the power struggle between the ANC or UDF at the time, and IFP kicked off in the 80s.
Yeah. Now I've got another.
Definitely, that's in our future. Definitely.
Yeah. I've got another question here from Mikkel, who says, should the future of South Africans not be within the African region at all? Would it not be better to find a totally new land?
Well, yes, I would like that. I mean, to see South Africa, it's going to go through decades of upheaval before there'll be any notion of a unified country of any sort in South Africa. In the meantime, certainly, I think we white people would certainly find more. It will be much better for us to find or to create contact with other white nations. I can see, for instance, happily affiliating with, say, Hungary or Poland,
or Australia.
Or Australia. Sure.
There's a huge expat South African community here in Australia. They actually have community forums. They have, and Perth is really the epicenter of the South African population. It's time. It's time
they seceded and started a South African republic.
Luckily, we don't have the same problems that you do in South Africa.
Yeah, very fortunate.
Property says, Scott, ask Gustav who he thinks can lead the white race in South Africa.
comes the time, comes the man. All women. I'm pretty sure when the time arrives that we're really scrambling to survive, and when the real struggle starts, and everybody knows we're part of the struggle, the right person will appear. It's happened time and again in Boer history. And to just go back to one instance, once again back in the 1870s, 1877, Britain with Shepstone doing the honours just rode into Pretoria with 25 policemen and annexed the Transvaal.
Yeah.
And the Transvaal was under the heel of the Brits for 3 years before three men, Hubert, Creer and MV Pretorius, got together and rallied the people, and we had the first Anglo-Boer War, and they gained their independence. I'm pretty sure, I know my people, I know the Afrikaner. When the time comes, there will be a leader.
Right. Now, one thing that I've forgotten who the general was, but he said, if you want to defeat the Germans, for example, you'll need 500,000, let's say, British soldiers. And then he went down smaller and smaller and smaller, and the last group that he said could beat Germany was, he said, if you get 500 Boers together, they would beat Germany.
Well, Germany was certainly a very tough nut to crack. Certainly we have an acumen for war. You can just go back to 1899 once again.
Yeah.
The British were pretty convinced it'll be home by Christmas, and they were stunned. They were, what did Kipling write? He says, we were taught a hell of a lesson. No, listen, we have the instincts we have the instincts for war. We have an acumen for war. Let's hope it's not necessary to use it, but it's certainly reassuring to know that should the situation arise, our people will be capable of looking after themselves.
Right. Now, Robert Williams has asked, what about BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa?
Oh, well, I'm sure they would welcome a strong white independent economy in South Africa. It would be a much better partnership for them, and I think they should surely be in favor of that.
Right. Now, okay, I think it was Rommel who said that, Frick. I think you're right, yeah. Now, Mikkel has asked, why have these minority groups not approached other governments for new land? I mean, minority South Africans have a phenomenal wealth still to purchase something like that.
Well, first of all, wealth is, as they said, and certainly we still have a lot of spending power, but it's not collectivized in any shape. We can't go and say we've got a pool of so many billions of rand. It certainly was something we investigated, sort of. For instance, Botswana is so huge and so sparsely populated. Surely we might be able to buy a little piece, say there in the triangle, just right to the north of them, and act as some sort of buffer zone between them and what's north of them. But we don't have the money as a pool of money. We don't have it.
Right. Now, isn't Botswana basically run by De Beers? Isn't that why it's a sound country?
Well, Botswana is there are a lot of differences and a lot of advantages there. First of all, as I say, it's a very sparsely populated country.
Right.
So, and they have a dominant tribe there. But also, let's be honest, they did a fine job of bringing about stability. They've got the same political party, the BNP, running Botswana now for the last 50 years.
Right.
But they certainly don't have the problems of all these factions, and they don't have racial problems. And then, of course, De Beers does play a huge role in Botswana. I think even they would agree. Which Botswana certainly looks a whole lot more attractive than South Africa right now.
Right. Now, Mikkel has asked another question. He says, does Gustav blame the older generations of minorities for what happened in South Africa? Who does he blame for the legacy left to the younger generations now in the hot water?
F.W. de Klerk. I would certainly blame him and his government. They just went about it in such an underhanded way. It's difficult to think that they did not have some really evil motives to do this. I mean, how can you just betray your country in this fashion, your people in this fashion? So I certainly blame them, but I don't blame anybody before them. Everybody did the best they could. Apartheid, in the way in which it was approached, was a failure. I mean, we've got to admit this, and it was probably a mistake in certain regards. But I don't blame anybody. They did the best they could. One thing I am absolutely convinced of is when they devised the policy of apartheid, they did it not to repress anybody, but to give everybody a chance. It wasn't about elevating one race above the others. It was about giving everybody a proper chance to make something of themselves.
Right.
So now, I don't blame anybody. No, I don't.
Gordon Blues has asked a really interesting question, and I just want to put my spin on this. And he says, can the Zulu Kingdom and the IFP be allies against the ANC land grab? I'd like to add to that. Let's take the hypothetical situation where the ANC collapses. And there's talk about the Zulus having their own separate piece of land in KwaZulu-Natal. You know, totally separate from South Africa. Whereas the whites are looking at the Western Cape. What are your views about... Is there a chance that the Zulus and the whites could actually work together, or actually help each other defend their lands against other tribes in South Africa?
I think it's very conceivable. I think we certainly have overlapping interests. The Zulus are fiercely independent. They hate being part of this government, apart from the Zuma years when they were really beating the gong, but even then it was the ANC faction of the Zulus, and they are they're a very proud and very traditional people. So I think they would absolutely clamour for independence in KwaZulu-Natal, take the whole of KwaZulu-Natal, and it would be to their benefit to support the whites in their claims for an independent country.
Right, and to the question of can the Zulu Kingdom and the IFP be allies?
Oh, well, the Zulu Kingdom and the IFP are pretty much the same. I mean,
Yeah, the Inkatha Freedom Party, yeah.
Buthelezi and I mean, I know he's retired now, but he's a prince of the Zulu royal house. And he's related to Goodwill, the King Goodwill in Zwelithini.
Right.
So certainly, I think they more or less speak from one mouth.
Now, Ron has asked, is Gustav aware that secession is written into our Constitution, Article 235?
Yes, it's they're calling it self-determination, but certainly. And it gets back to the point that I made about Nigel Farage and Brexit. It is there. It is there. I mean, it's the one thing that they did negotiate in our favour, and this was largely due to Constant Viljoen and the perceived threat right then of insurrection that they tried to counter. But there it is. It's in the Constitution. But we're not demanding it. We're not claiming it. And that's why I think it's time that we nominated, say, 3 people. I like the number 3. It always seems to me.
Yeah, because that way you don't have a dictatorship.
Yeah, yeah. And get three people together and send them to government. As I say, not to negotiate, not to ask, to walk in there and say, this is it. Now we are demanding our self-determination, our freedom, our independence.
Right. And there'd have to be obviously leaders in the white community. Now, I'm going to just address the people watching in the side chat. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. It's been a very, very interesting discussion, and I do want to thank our guest, Gustav, for all his input. It's nice to get different perspectives, and of course, we're going to be talking to Dan Root tomorrow night. That's Monday night.
That'll be a treat.
And we're talking to AfriForum's Ian Cameron on Tuesday night. So we've got a couple of really interesting nights lined up, and there's some great guests coming up later in the week that I'll tell you about nearer the time. And this is a huge shout out to Marlena, who looks after sorting out the live stream guests, and she does an amazing job. Thanks, sweetie. Okay, now we've got one question here. Charlotte Smith asks, Gustav, what happened to the Avia beer?
Certainly also not an expert in the Avia beer, but I'm sure they are still there, and they're still organising and getting themselves ready. They're not the factor that they used to be, but who knows, the thing about the Avia beer is they've got a very strong identity, and in times of crisis, people tend to gravitate towards a strong identity. I'm thinking of the National Socialist German Labour Party, known as the Nazis. Just for an instance, I certainly don't want to link the two of them. But if you look what happened when Hitler arrived on the scene, it was really a small, insignificant party. But he created such an identity that they just drew in so many people, and I think the Avia being their way can certainly still be a factor in the future. Scott, can I just quickly before we wrap up just
go ahead.
Mention this? Last time we spoke, I was in a chat with you, live chat, about the movie we produced last year.
Yes, tell us more about that.
Just quickly want to give it a bit of a punt.
Yeah.
It's called in Afrikaans Die Eerste Reël van Oorlewing, but I gave it English subtitles, so it's available as the first rule of survival. Very briefly, it's the time of anarchy. It's almost prophetic about what's happening right now. But a girl has to defend a secret installation, and she has no choice. She can't run anymore, so she needs to learn how to fight. That's just briefly. And anybody that's interested in viewing it, it is available on Vimeo. So they can just go to Vimeo and do a search for First Rule of Survival.
Right, and I have to tell everybody that I've actually watched the entire movie, and it's very, very interesting. It's set in, I think it's a single room, isn't it? And they're sort of two actors, and it's a really interesting film talking about people who are in that position where they're trying to survive under the worst conditions. Now, I'm going to wrap up the live stream, and
sure.
What I'd like to do is ask you, Gustav, is there something you'd like to say to all the people watching now and people who might watch the video later? Any message you'd like to send out to people, please? Now,
sure.
Go ahead now.
Sure. Well, here's the thing. I'm bullish about our future. I'm excited about our future. Listen, they're not strong enough. They're not good enough. They're not clever enough to beat us. They can't beat us. Just keep faith in the Lord, and keep your confidence in your people. And I'm not just talking about Afrikaner people, as I say, also the English-speaking South Africans that support our thinking. We will not only survive, we will thrive once this is over.
Right. Okay. Guys, I'm going to wrap up now. We've been talking for over 2 hours. My live streams tend to go for about 2 hours plus, which is fine because I think we're all getting a really good education by having a look at different perspectives. I just want to say to the moderators, and in particular Jarko, who's like my lead moderator, thanks guys, you're always doing a fantastic job. To everybody else who's participated in the side chat, thank you for doing so and posting your questions. That's what these live streams are all about. And to the Loving Life community, everybody who's been watching tonight, thank you so much for your support and being part of our channel. Please tell your friends about our channel. Let's get the word out there, wherever you are in the world, whether you're in America, Australia, the UK. Of course, most of my subscribers are in South Africa, but please guys, tell the world that this channel is really getting the real news out there. Alright, with that I'm going to shut down the channel. I just want to say thank you once again to Gustav. Been really, really interesting. I've really appreciated your time, and thank you for being our guest tonight.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for everything you're doing. We really appreciate that.
No problems. And don't forget, guys, Dan Root from Prague tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Bye for now. Oh, and please take care.